starting with the motor part. We're already finished with introduction last week, no? And then the sensory part. The special senses will be at the end because it's special senses, but still part of the sensory. But now we will continue, we'll move on with the motor part of the nervous system. So for motor, we have, it's divided into three. First, we have, for today, associated motor activities associated with movement and, movement. Then next week, we will discuss motor activity associated with learning, memory, wakefulness, and emotion, behavior. Okay, that's still part of motor function of the nervous system. And then the last week would be ANS, specialized motor function of the nervous system. So, how was your exam last week? Sensory? Okay lang? So, let's move on to the motor. And under the motor functions related to movement, we have the parts of the brain associated with it, the spinal cord, then you have the cortex and the brain stem, and then the last chapter is the cerebrum and the cerebellum, the basal ganglia. Okay, before we begin, let's pause for a short word of prayer. Let's pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, thank you for gathering us here once again to study, and as we start this lesson, may you be with us, may you bless these young minds who are studying for future use in alleviating the needs and health of the community that they will serve later on. Thank you, Lord, for giving us good health and a good weather, and may you bless us today and in the coming days this week. Thank you for hearing us. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so let's go first to the spinal cord and the cord reflexes. So anatomically, if you cut the spinal cord continues from the brain going down to your into your vertebra, the back, no, until your lumbar region. And if you cut it cross-sectionally, you will see this is half the spinal cord. Okay, you will see like a butterfly-shaped anatomically, we call this the gray matter, which is a collection of neurons. Okay, and then we have the white matter outside. So in the gray matter, you can see nerve fibers going out here in the posterior region. This is the sensory root, and then the motor root in the anterior part. Okay, so all the sensory signal stimuli input goes through this root, and from here it gets integrated in the gray matter, and if there's already an effect or response, it goes out through the motor root. Okay, and we have interneurons in between. So aside from the neurons that relay signals at the spinal cord, we have other neurons. We have the anterior motor neurons and interneurons. So anterior motor neurons are the neurons motor. So output neurons. They are divided into alpha motor neurons and gamma motor neurons. So the alpha motor neurons are the larger type of motor neurons, and they're served by A alpha nerve fibers. A alpha are the largest type, and then the gamma motor neurons are the A gamma nerve fibers. Okay, and these A alpha nerve fibers, or the alpha motor neurons, are what would comprise the motor unit. They innervate the muscles that are used for skeletal muscle contraction, the one we discussed in the skeletal block. Okay, Okay, but the gamma motor neurons are the smaller type of nerve fibers, and they go to the intrafusal fibers, which we will discuss later on. Okay, there are also a lot of interneurons, which are small and highly excitable neurons with many interconnections there in the gray matter. So this is what it looks like. Well, let's see. So if you have a skeletal muscle, you have a sensory part, sends signals to the spinal cord through the sensory root, and from the sensory root, you have connections here, interneurons, and then the motor part goes back to the same skeletal muscle. Let's take a look at one muscle fiber. Before we delve into, there are also Rensch's cells, which are responsible for recurrent inhibition. These are inhibitory cells in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and they receive input from collateral axons of motor neurons, and when stimulated, they send negative feedback on the motor neuron through lateral inhibition. There are actually two types of sensory receptors in the muscle. So we have number one is muscle spindle, and the second one is Golgi tendon organs. So muscle spindles are distributed throughout the belly of the muscle, while the Golgi tendon organs are, as its name implies, it's only on the tendons. Okay? For the function, the muscle spindle would send information to the nervous system about muscle length or rate of change on length. So this is its function. So it's like when you're walking, for example, you're not only using motor, you're also sending signals to your higher centers about the state of the muscle that the muscle is in. So this is through muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs. So primarily, muscle spindles send information to the nervous system about the muscle length or the rate of change in length. What is the length of the muscle now? It sends to the CNS, or the higher centers. Also, the Golgi tendon organs transmit information about tendon tension or rate of change in tension. So, tendon, located in Golgi tendon organs, located in tendons, and they transmit information about tendon tension and rate of change in tension. Okay, so those are the main differences. So, let's take a look first at the muscle spindle. Okay, muscle spindle. So for the muscle spindle, so this is, as you've said, they're distributed all throughout the belly of the muscle. They are served by two types of nerve fibers, sensory nerve fibers. So these yellow ones, nerve fibers are sensory. These are the motor nerve fibers. As I've said, the motor nerve fibers are A alpha and A gamma, correct? The A alpha are the larger ones, the A gamma are the smaller ones. The A alpha are the ones that compose the motor unit. They supply the extrafusal muscle, which are the ones that are responsible for muscle contraction. But the A gamma are the ones that would supply to the intrafusal, this darker red, the intrafusal muscle fibers. There are around, I think, 3 to 12 in one muscle spindle, intrafusal muscle fibers, and these are their motor innervation. But for their sensory fibers, there are two types of sensory fibers that serve them. We have the primary, afferent, or annulospiral endings. Okay, so this one. And then the secondary, afferent. So when you say afferent, sensory. When efferent, motor. Okay, so these are sensory nerve fibers. So the primary afferent is a type 1A fiber. The secondary is type 2. Okay, so the primary is also bigger. Type 2 is smaller. And of course, the dictum, the principle says that the bigger, faster conductivity than the smaller. Okay, so those are the two sensory endings on the intrafusal fiber. So the direction of signal is from the fiber going out, from the muscle spindle going to the spinal cord. For this one, it's going into the muscle spindle. But there are also two types of intrafusal fibers. Okay, so these are the sensory endings. But there are two types of the fibers, the intrafusal fibers. Okay, we have the nuclear bag and the nuclear chain. In one muscle spindle, there are around 1 to 3 nuclear bag intrafusal fibers, but more nuclear chain. So if you see nuclear bag, it looks like a bag, so it's easy to see anatomically, histologically. Because the nuclei are arranged like they're in a bag. But in nuclear chain, they're like in a chain. Okay, so the difference between these two is that in the nuclear bag, it excites primarily sensory ending, while the nuclear chain excites primary and secondary ending. So you see here, primary ending, okay, receives signal from the nuclear bag and the nuclear chain. But the secondary ending or secondary afferent nerve fiber receives signal only from the nuclear chain. Diba? Nuclear chain only, wala siya here. Okay, so, and the nuclear bag is excited by gamma D nerve fibers. These are dynamic nerve fibers. For nuclear chain, it's gamma S or gamma static nerve fibers, which moves us to the types of responses of these sensory endings. When you say S, static, D, dynamic. Static is a response of both the primary and secondary endings to the length of the receptor when the muscle spindle is stretched slowly. Okay, that's a static response. But the dynamic response is the response of the primary ending only, to the rate of change of receptor length when there is a rapid rate of change in spindle length, but only when the length is actually increasing. So primary ending has this dynamic response because it innervates both nuclear chain and nuclear bag and nuclear chain. For static response, it's response of both the primary and secondary endings to the length of the receptor when the muscle spindle is stretched slowly. Both the primary and secondary endings. Okay, so let's go to the application of these sensory endings. So we have here a muscle stretch reflex. So you have the muscle spindle, okay, muscle spindle, which is the sensory nerve, sensory receptor in the belly of the muscle. Okay, if there's a stimulus, it will send signal to the nerve fiber going to the sensory root, okay, and to the gray horn of the spinal cord, and from there it would elicit the signal for the motor neuron, okay, motor neuron. So this is the neuronal circuit of the stretch reflex. If you noticed, this muscle stretch reflex integrates that signal at the level of the spinal cord. No need for it to go to the higher centers. So this allows it to be very fast in response because you see it's just one signal to here, not a lot of relay neurons for it to pass through the rest of the nervous system. Okay, so clinically, this is the simplest manifestation of the muscle spindle function. So there are two components of the muscle stretch reflex. You have the dynamic stretch reflex and the static stretch reflex. Dynamic stretch reflex is elicited by potent dynamic signals transmitted from the primary sensory index endings of the muscle spindles caused by rapid stretch or unstretch. It functions to oppose sudden changes in muscle length. And then the static stretch reflex is elicited by continuous static receptor signals transmitted by both primary and secondary endings, causing the degree of muscle contraction to remain reasonably constant. Okay, so those are the two components of the muscle stretch reflex. And another important function of the muscle spindle is its ability to average the contraction. Like for example, in this graph, you see in letter A, this is a muscle contraction caused by a spinal cord signal in a normal muscle. But then in this one, green green lines here, green curve, this muscle has denervated. So there is no more innervation in the muscle spindles. So note the smoothing effect of the muscle spindle in reflex A. So when you, if the muscle spindle has an intact innervation, the effect of muscle contraction is smooth, okay? But if it is denervated, okay, you see the muscle contraction, it's jerky, okay? It cannot, it's not smooth, it's jerky, it's not averaged, okay? So that's the importance of the muscle spindle. Another importance is that the muscle spindle system stabilizes body position during tense action. Okay, so anytime we do a muscle function that requires a high degree of delicate and exact positioning, the excitation of the appropriate muscle spindles by signals from the higher centers stabilizes the positions in the major joints. Okay, so we're able to do these activities because of muscle spindles. So basically, it just states that in order for movement to occur, like for example, walking, the simple act of walking, the muscle spindle continuously sends feedback to the nervous system about the state of the muscle, the length of the muscle, okay? So it tells the higher part, the spinal cord, that this is what the muscle is right now, is at right now, so you have to do this, so the effect is like this. Okay, so that's the primary function of the muscle spindle. Clinical applications we showed you in your laboratory. So the knee jerk and other muscle jerks. So the knee jerk is, diba, what you do in the physical exam. Oh, you learn about this in your second year, but the knee jerk. So what the clinician does is we ask the patient to sit on the table with a foot hanging, and then we, with hammer, a rubber hammer, we tap the patellar tendon, and this would stimulate the simple muscle stretch reflex we discussed earlier. Okay, so once it's stimulated, the knee would, the leg would, what do you call this? Flick, no? So the reflex is intact. It assesses the sensitivity of stretch reflexes and assesses the degree of facilitation of the spinal cord centers. Okay, another one is the clonus, oscillation of the muscle jerks. So what happens is, normally when, if there is stretch, there is contraction of the muscle. But in what happens in this ankle clonus is, because of stretch, there is contraction, and when the foot drops down, there is relaxation, and then it elicits another stretch. So there is oscillation, there is again another contraction, and then the foot drops down and there's another contraction. So this is also an example of a stretch reflex. Okay, so that's an ankle clonus. Okay, enough with the muscle spindle. Let's go to the second type, the Golgi tendon organs. Okay, these Golgi tendon organs are located in the tendons, as you said, and transmit information about tendon tension or rate of change in tension. Okay, so their primary function is to detect muscle tension, and it has both a dynamic response and a static response. And they are also served by large type 1B nerve fibers. So they prevent these tendon organs prevent excessive tension on the muscle. Okay, and it equalizes contractile force among the muscle fiber. This is its primary function and importance. It is actually an inhibitory type of reflex because it provides a negative feedback mechanism that prevents the development of too much tension on the muscle and prevents excessive tension on the muscle and equalizes contractile force among the fiber. Okay? Just know the differences between the muscle spindle when it comes to their effects primarily for this discussion. Okay. Let's go to the clinical application of these muscle stretch reflexes. So when you say flexor reflex, okay, it causes flexion, no? Flexion of the muscle. It's okay. This is any type of cutaneous sensory stimulus. This reflex is when any type of cutaneous sensory stimulus from a limb is likely to cause the flexor muscles of the limb to contract, whereby withdrawing the limb from the stimulating object. This is also called nociceptive or pain reflex. Like for example, when you touch a hot stove, the flexor reflex would be stimulated, and very fast you withdraw your limb from that painful object, no? Nociceptive or pain reflex. Okay, so it causes flexion. Withdrawal reflex is some part of the body other than the limbs is painfully stimulated. That part will be withdrawn from the stimulus. So it's the same, but not the limb, because it doesn't cause flexion. Like for example, if you sit down on a durian na lang, you will immediately stand up, no? Because of withdrawal reflex. Okay, so still muscle stretch reflex. And you see, this is the myogram of the flexor reflex, showing the rapid onset, and then there's fatigue, and then the after discharge, after the stimulus is over. Now, another type of reflex mentioned is the cross extensor reflex. So what happens in this reflex is about 0.2 to 0.5 seconds after a stimulus elicits a flexor reflex in one limb, the opposite limb begins to extend. Like for example, when you're walking and you stepped on a thumbtack, for example, a sharp object. So the initial response is for you to withdraw, right? Withdraw from that or flex, okay. But there is a, after 0.2 to 0.5 of a second, it elicits a flexor reflex in one limb, and the opposite limb would extend. Okay, so the one limb, the ipsilateral limb would flex, the other limb would extend. Okay, this pushes the entire body away from the object. Okay, so that's a cross extensor reflex. One reflex is the signal to one group of muscles is for it to contract or flex. The other group of muscles, the antagonistic muscle, is to extend. No, so and if you look at the myogram of cross extensor reflex, so it's not as abrupt, as fast as the first reflex, no, the flexor reflex. So there's a slight delay, but the after discharge is prolonged. So you can support your weight. For example, if you withdraw it, you can still support. Dili siya dali mo wala. Okay? The after discharge is prolonged. Okay? And that's for the cross extensor reflex. These reflexes are what we call, no, what we have discussed previously, reciprocal inhibition, the same phenomenon we discussed last week, where one circuit goes there to cause depolarization, the other circuit is to inhibit. Okay, so reciprocal inhibition with reciprocal innervation. So there are some other reflexes discussed in your book which are easy to read. I give it to you as an assignment. There are also some questions here from the exam. Okay, other reflexes of the spinal cord, supportive. These are all the functions of the spinal cord, no? The importance of the spinal cord. Positive supportive reaction, cord writing reflexes, stepping and walking movements like rhythmical stepping movements of a single limb, reciprocal stepping of opposite limbs, walking, basic walking, diagonal stepping of all four limbs, or mark time reflex, and galloping reflex. And there are abnormal reflexes clinically, which you will meet later on, that cause muscle spasm. Like for example, from a broken bone. So if there's a broken bone, it causes muscle spasm to that area of a broken bone. Peritonitis, irritation or inflammation of the peritoneum. You will see your patients later on in the ER with peritonitis. Their abdominal muscles are hard like because of muscle spasm, because these are spinal cord reflexes. Okay, and muscle cramps. Okay, these are all clinical importance of the spinal cord reflex. Okay, so that's the importance of the spinal cord in movement, walking, reflexes. Let's go to the next part of the brain that's involved in motor neurophysiology, the cerebral cortex and the brainstem. So what is the cerebral cortex? Anatomically, that's what you see now outside. The very visible cerebral cortex. Your chapter on cerebral cortex has a motor side, and then the other one is, I think, intellectual functions. But we will discuss the motor side today. The intellectual functions we will discuss on next week. Okay. The intellectual functions. Okay. Motor, the cerebral cortex, as we have previously stated, has been divided into areas, no? So that it's easy for us to know which area was it referring to. We call it the Brodmann areas of the cerebral cortex. Let's just have a review of the major divisions of the brain. You have the forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain based on the development, no? So for the forebrain, you have the diencephalon, which is composed of the thalamus, hypothalamus, and controls autonomic functions, and the cerebral cortex. Okay, you have the diencephalon and then cerebral cortex, the largest part of the brain for information processing. The hindbrain, this blue one, is divided into metencephalon and myelencephalon. For the metencephalon, we have the pons and cerebellum, which we know is cerebellum for balance and equilibrium and coordination. The medulla oblongata, we have learned, diba, in your respi and cardio for breathing, heart rate, digestion. Okay, so that's the hindbrain. The midbrain is in the middle, of course, a small part. Connects the forebrain to the hindbrain for auditory and visual response motor function. No, don't worry, this will not come out in the exam. It's just a review so that you will know what you are talking about. Okay, because you haven't had neuroanatomy. So let's go to I was saying we have already discussed the spinal cord function in motor activity. This time we will discuss the cortex and the brainstem. Okay, so as I've said, the cerebral cortex looks like this, no? And then if you remember last week we discussed about the somatic somatosensory areas, area 1 and area 2. So, tapan niya, just very near it is the motor cortex. Okay, the area for motor. So we have the three areas for motor. We have the primary motor cortex, the premotor area here, and the supplementary area. So three areas for motor. Okay, so let's see. So this is the cerebrum and then okay. For the motor, if you have the sensory homunculus, you also have the motor. This is a representation of the parts of the body that are served by the motor cortex. Okay, so if you look which parts of the body have big motor dedicated to motor activity. Okay, so muscles for vocalization and muscles for hand movement, especially on the thumb. Very important for motor activity. Okay, so this is the topographical organization of the specific parts of the body in the motor cortex. Okay, so that's the primary motor cortex. Then you have the premotor or area, which has what is this? The premotor area causes much more complex patterns of movement than the discrete patterns generated in the primary motor cortex. For instance, okay, like in dancing, the pattern may be to position this hand or this foot here, so it's properly oriented to perform a dance, for example. To achieve these results, the most anterior part of the premotor area first develops a motor image. So it develops an image for the movement to be performed. Okay? So after this is done, it sends signals to the motor cortex. So you put your hand here, your arm, your foot here. Okay? So that's the premotor area's function. Okay, so, and aside from that, in this area is what we call mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are, they function to observe, through observation, they look at the behavior of another person, and then through mirroring, they're able to send signal to the primary motor cortex that this is what you will do. Put your hand here, this and that. Okay, through mirror neurons. So that is how you do your TikTok videos. You're using your premotor cortex before it goes into the motor. Primary motor. Okay, and then, what's this? You have the supplementary motor area. What is its function? Okay, primarily, this allows, if this is stimulated, it allows movements to be bilateral, okay, rather than unilateral. Okay, there are also other specialized areas of motor control in the cerebral cortex. So we have area 55 of Brodmann's area or Broca's area, area for word formation. Damage to this area would not prevent a person from vocalizing, but instead of actually producing words, it would be like sounds that doesn't form into words. Word formation. They can actually vocalize, but the words are not formed. Okay, so that's Broca's area. What else? There are other areas here. Areas for eye movements, which is very near to head rotation. So eye movements very related to head rotation. And then area for hand skills. So these are hand-eye coordination, very well developed areas here for those with good hand-eye coordination, hand skills. Okay, so those are the areas of the cerebral cortex for motor function. Now, let's go to what were the pathways for sensory? Ganit? There are two. somatosensory areas, tracts. Okay, and okay. So for motor, so for sensory, that's from the sensory receptors to the brain. For motor, it's from the brain. So these are descending from the brain to the effects or to the muscles. So for the motor, the major pathway is the corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tract. So from the term itself, cortico, from the cortex to the spinal cord, corticospinal tract. So you will learn more of this in your neuroanatomy. I will not go through it na lang. There's also crossover here at the medulla. Okay, crosses over to the medulla. And what else? Another tract pathway for motor control is the cortico-rubrospinal. So it goes through the rubro means red. It goes to the red nucleus because it stains red in histopathology. So cortico-rubrospinal tract is an alternative pathway, okay, for motor function. Okay, so what would be the effect if there is problem in the pathways, for example, in the cortex or in the pathway? So this is now where you will see your stroke patients. Have you ever seen a stroke patient? Yeah? No? So, for example, removal of the primary motor cortex or the area pyramidales, or there is like a blood clot there, so that that part in the motor cortex is ischemic. So no function, loss of function, there is no blood flow going there. There is loss of voluntary, because it's motor man, loss of voluntary control of discrete movements of the distal segments of the limbs, especially of the hands and fingers. So this is why you see your patients paralyzed and can't move. Okay, motor cortex. Lesions that damage areas adjacent to the motor cortex would cause muscle spasticity. So you have these examples of lesions in internal capsule or motor cortex. Okay, so there would be now no movement, discrete movements. Okay, so that's for the cerebral cortex. What about the brainstem? Okay, the brainstem, you have, these are the functions of the brainstem: respiration, cardiovascular system, GI function, stereotype movements of the body, equilibrium, and eye movements. So in the brainstem, because it's a group of structures there, you have what they call, it's divided into two nuclei. Nuclei is a cluster of neurons in the CNS, within the cerebral hemispheres and brainstem. Okay, cluster of neurons. So reticular nuclei and vestibular nuclei. In the pons, we call it pontine reticular nuclei. In the medulla, medular reticular nuclei. The pons functions primarily to support body against gravity. The nuclei in the pons. Where's the pontine? Pontine reticular nuclei, support against gravity, while the medullary reticular nuclei inhibit anti-gravity. So they're opposing. Inhibit anti-gravity muscles. Okay, that's for the brainstem. The vestibular nuclei, we have lateral and medial, support the pontine reticular system. Okay, that's the brainstem. Now, there is what we call brainstem dysfunction when the brainstem is cut below the mid-level of the mesencephalon. The patient or an animal would show this decerebrate posturing where there is involuntary extension, positioning of the arms, and flexion of the hands, and then knee extension and plantar flexion, okay, because of the midbrain lesion. Okay, that's decerebrate posturing. Okay, because there is blockage of input to the medullary reticular nuclei. Medullary reticular nuclei, okay, which inhibits anti-gravity muscles. So if it's inhibited, the medullary reticular inhibitor becomes non-functional. So there is full overactivity of the pons, okay, pontine reticular nuclei. Okay, so that's decerebrate posturate. Okay, we see in midbrain lesions. Okay, that's for the function of the spinal cord and cortex and the brainstem. Let's go to the last. So the cerebral cortex has intellectual functions. We will discuss this next week. The last is the last ganit. Cerebellum and basal ganglia. So we'll just go over this fast time. Okay. So, cerebellum and basal ganglia. These two cannot control muscle function by themselves. Instead, they function in association with other systems of motor control. So, these are generally, this is their importance, no, in motor function. For the cerebellum, it's important in timing of motor activities, so rhythm. Important in rapid, smooth progression from one muscle movement to the next, and helps control intensity of muscle contraction or muscle load changes, and controls necessary interplay between agonist and antagonist muscle groups. That's for the cerebellum. Okay? Basal ganglia helps plan and control complex patterns of muscle movement. That's basal ganglia. And control relative intensities of separate movements, directions of movements, sequencing of multiple successive and parallel movements. Okay, for the basal ganglia. So that's it. Mana. Joke. Basically, that's it. No? Let's go to the cerebellum. So, cerebellum is also called silent area. There is no conscious sensation here, and there are rare motor movements. This is vital for rapid muscular activities like running, when you're typing in your laptop, and then you're playing the piano. Okay, so that's the cerebellum. Because it helps sequence motor activities, sequencing of motor activities, and makes corrective adjustments by comparing actual to intended movements. While you are doing the activity, it's also adjusting. It's helping you to adjust. Okay, so sayop ni, you should not do that. It helps you to adjust while you're doing the activity. And it aids the cortex in planning the next movement in advance to the movements. So the movement is smooth. Okay, so that's the cerebellum. So anatomically, so this is the cerebellum. Okay, you have the anterior, posterior lobe, and the flocculonodular node. But functionally, they're divided into three parts. You have the vermis, intermediate zone, and the lateral zones. So you have the vermis here, intermediate, and lateral. Okay, vermis for the middle part of the body, axial body, head, neck, shoulders, and limbs. Intermediate is for the distal upper and lower limbs. While the lateral zones works with the cerebral cortex in overall planning. Okay, so these are its functions. Okay? Three functional parts of the cerebellum. And it has pathways also, we call the spinocerebellar pathways, which are the most rapid conduction pathway in the CNS, spinocerebellar pathway. So these are afferent. So afferent means sensory. So from the spinal cord going to the cerebellum, spinocerebellar pathway, fastest pathway. How about for efferent? Okay, for efferent, if it's from the vermis, okay, the fastigial nuclei, medulla and pons, this is for posture. For the intermediate zones, this is where it passes through. So, as you said, the intermediate zone for the limbs, no? Agonist, antagonist muscle of peripheral limbs. The lateral zone through this pathway to coordinate sequential movements. Okay, so those are the efferent pathways from the cerebellum. No need to memorize. What's important is this. Okay, so basically this. You will memorize that in your neuroanatomy. I will not let you memorize now. Okay, cerebellum. Histologically, we have these cells in the cerebellum, Purkinje and deep nuclear cells. So the functional unit, these are the functional unit of the cerebellar cortex, and they are firing continuously under resting conditions. And if you have layers, 6 layers of the cerebrum, you have layers also of the cerebellum. Okay, so you have the granular layer, Purkinje cell layer, and the molecular layer, which is outermost. This one is the innermost. These are the cells it contain. In the middle layer, it's always inhibitory. Okay, what else? Okay, so, and there are connections also within these layers through climbing fibers. Okay, so, and they condition the Purkinje cells. They play a role in motor learning, like in playing the piano. And then another connection is the mossy fibers. Okay, I'm not gonna, you can just read through that. Okay, so there are 3 levels of the cerebellum related to the 3 functional parts: vestibulum, spinocerebellum, and cerebrocerebellum. So vestibulum relates to the flocculonodular lobes, so limbs, postural movements, calculates in advance the resurrectional movements before progression to the next sequential movements. Spinocerebellum is in the mid vermis and intermediate zones. So it provides feedback control distal limb movements, prevent overshoot and damp movements, control ballistic movements. Cerebrocerebellum, okay, cerebral and then cerebellum, the lateral zones, control planning and timing of sequential movements. So basically 3 functional parts of the cerebellum. Okay. So what happens, so clinical significance, if there is problem in the cerebellum? Okay. You have this. What's this? Past pointing mani. Dysmetria is past pointing means there is absence in when the person, you will have this in your second year, you ask the person to point to an object. The patient will not be able to point to that. Okay, it will point beyond that object. Okay, that's past pointing. What else? Dysdiadochokinesia. Ano sabi ni? Ataxia. Okay, the patient will not be able to have postural movements. Dysdiadochokinesia. Is this dysdiadochokinesia? Okay, this one is dysdiadochokinesia. It's inability to perform rapidly alternating movements. Okay, this is if you ask the patient to do rapid alternating movements, they won't be able to do this. There's a problem with the cerebellum. Okay, what else? So many. Dysarthria. Okay, they will not be able to progress in talking. They'll be mumbled in talking, vocalization. Some syllables loud and some are weak. Okay, some with long intervals, some short intervals. So lack of coordination. Intention tremor. Okay, so the movements would oscillate back and forth several times before hitting on the mark. Okay, so that's a problem with the cerebellum. Cerebellar nystagmus is the tremor of the eyeballs occurring constantly when one attempts to fixate the eyes on a scene to one side of the head because of damaged floccular nodes. Hypotonia is decreased tone of the musculature. So that's also a clinical abnormality of the cerebellum. And then lastly, the basal ganglia. Okay, so for basal ganglia, it's for performing complex patterns of motor activity like writing letters of the alphabet, cutting paper with scissors, hammering nails, shooting a basketball through a hoop, so mga sports activities, throwing a baseball, vocalization, that's basal ganglia. Okay? If there are abnormalities, these are what you would see: athetosis, hemiballismus, chorea. You will have a lot of this in your PD for the basal ganglia. I will not. Okay. I will not discuss a lot of this now because you'll have a lot of this in your PD. Clinical abnormalities in the basal ganglia. So these are the syndromes associated with damage to the basal ganglia: Parkinson's and Huntington's disease. Okay, so that's because complex patterns of movement, and those are the functions of the basal ganglia. Okay, so you see as a whole the integration of the many parts of the nervous system for motor. We have at the spinal level, we've already discussed, and then the hindbrain level, and then the motor cortex level. All these three function together to produce movements as intended. Okay? So those are the three parts of the nervous system associated with motor function. And that ends our lesson. 1/4. Are you ready for an exam? So, okay, so you'll have more time for your lab, 8:40. You can go to your laboratory. Next week, we'll have the intellectual functions, we'll have an exam, post-test. Budget na inyong kalipay, why exam? Kamamo, kalipay. Okay, you may now go to your laboratory.